understand where that oppression begins. God will never oppress you. He will never oppress you. If you've got oppression in your life, it's not God. And it's not your wife or your husband or your teenagers or whatever else we begin to go in my job and my life and all that. No. It's the enemy. It does that. But he comes in various forms because we don't fight against flesh and blood, Ephesians tells us. It's principalities and powers and unseen spiritual forces. And so those things swirl about us all the time. And many times what happens as Christians, because we've got more holes than Swiss cheese in our life. Because we allow this door open and this door open and this door open and all of these kind of things. And so the enemy comes in at will. And I love what Kate said on the video about Sozo before. He begins to take up residence in these things. And so moves about freely. And, the enemy is defeated.
Yeah, come on.
The enemy is defeated. You at least need to tell yourself that. Instead of sitting in your mind going, I think he is in my life. I don't know whether he is. And that's the reason many people don't articulate how they're feeling, because they just know that's not true in their life. God is great. And yet many times we don't allow that to come out of our mouth because we're not sure that he's great in our lives. He might be great in someone else's life, but he's not great in my life because I know my life. And yet you're a new translation. You're a new creation. And we get our new creation theology, I tell you what, everything begins to change for us. And so this young man went to the back of his shop and he stopped and he pulled down the blinds first of all, went to the back of the shop, and he was bothered by the fact that if he died tonight, where would he spend eternity? And so he took off his apron, it says, and he says this in his own journal, an own story, it's his own story now, but he got down in amongst all of the shoes and he says, God, if you are there tonight, I want to spend eternity with you. And he had an encounter with God in that room that changed his life. And he went out and he began to preach the gospel. He didn't know the gospel, but he began to preach the gospel. In fact, he was quite a dramatic kind of guy. And it really upset a lot of people, the way that he dramatized things. And D.L. Moody became famous for these amazing meetings that he had. And when the great fire of Chicago swept through, D.L. Moody was seeing tens of people get saved. And when he walked through with an incredible pain in his life, because he saw this incredible destruction of this magnificent city. We've got someone from Chicago here this morning. Janet, it's lovely to have you with us. It really is. Where is Janet? Hi, Janet. It's lovely to have you with us. But you'll know the story. Your family will know the story of the great fire of Chicago. And D.L. Moody walked through this, and I had not a dissimilar kind of a expression this morning. No fire in Invercargill, but there was a little bit, just a minuscule amount of pain as I went past Southland Boys High this morning, and I had to wait in a long time for traffic, wishing I'd never turned down past the roundabout to go past there, because people were just packed. I'm going, wow, church. But it was the farmer's market. And I found myself negotiating into that, and I wasn't interested in the carrots. I was just interested in the fact that people were more interested in carrots. And it grieved me. I remember driving down, and I was angry at the devil for distracting a whole community of people. Where a man like William Booth, for example, stood in Wokna Place twice and preached the gospel. And hundreds of people got saved in Invercargill. Hundreds of people got saved. And yet now it's a passionless church we've got in the city. I feel like this is a valedictory kind of a message this morning. You know, one of those ones you'd never preach again because you think that people won't come back. But I don't actually care. because somehow we have to put fire in our belly again. That worship this morning was pathetic. And I'm only talking to the believers. Because if you are not a Christian here this morning, then this doesn't apply to you, because you can't worship. I understand that. But there is a drawing power of God that will draw you into his presence and will change you irreparably. It's phenomenal. And what he'll do, because I've known this, I've been born again since I was 11 years old. I'm 59 now, so I've got a reasonable track record of all of that. And there's been ups and downs and all of those kind of things. But I know that God made me a new creation, changed me. Absolutely changed me. And I've had to be reborn a few times. There's been some memorials in my life and all of those kind of things. And that's fantastic. And that's exactly what happened to D.L. Moody when he walked past Boys High. Went past the fire of Chicago. He was grieved in the spirit that men and women and boys and girls had been burnt and had died and lost their lives, and men and women had lost their livelihoods, and the city was gutted, its heart was torn out. And he said, where are all these people now? In a Christless eternity or a Christ-filled eternity? And he was so impacted by that the DNA of revival began to flow through him in such a way that the next time he preached exactly the same messages, instead of tens coming, hundreds and thousands began to get born again because something had changed in him. And that's what happens when you get born again. The old has gone. It's time to throw off the old garments. And remember when we first got saved? Remember how cool it was? The sky was bluer, the grass was greener, the people even looked nicer. It was just amazing. Even your snotty teenagers, that used to get kind of so frustrated with it, they look so angelic. You kind of had faith for them. And church was amazing, and it was like worship. I remember a lady called Peggy Swain going to a church that I used to go to many years ago, and she'd been so touched by the power of God, and it was a church that you weren't allowed to raise your hands in. You will not raise your hands. The deacons would take you out or tap you on the shoulder. That's how bad it was. Don't do that. Don't do that, please. It's not acceptable. And she would stand there and she goes, I don't give a rip, I'm old. Right to her dying day when I buried her, she was just like that. She was just outside of herself. She'd just go, I don't care, I'm going to lift my hands, I'm going to say amen, it's like, And so D.L. Moody saw these people saved. And he teamed up with a guy who could play the keyboard. Except in those days it wasn't a keyboard, it was a squeeze box. One of those horrible things, And in fact, the church, it was so outside of the church's experience in music because they were used to organs. And they called it the devil's bellows. You're not bringing that sucker in here that's like demonic, But D.L. Moody and Ira Sankey, they teamed up together and they did these amazing crusades and revivals and saw thousands and thousands of people saved. Wrote a little book called The Golden Bell Hymnal. No, you're all dead. That's good. That's good because it's a very old book. Oh, you're not? You know it. My Lord, you're older than I thought. And so the Golden Bell Hymnal. And so they would sing all these things. And one night when they were preaching, this is Uganda. This is Uganda again. This is Uganda because you don't know who's in the congregation. But here was this ugly little boy sitting in the front row. That's how they described him. This nuggety, ugly little boy that no one would sit next to. He smelt. He was unclean, but he sat right in the front row. And he gave his heart to Jesus that night. And Ira Sankey and D.L. Moody went and prayed for him and encouraged them, they said, in the Lord. And that man became known as Gypsy Smith. And Gypsy Smith was a phenomenal evangelist. He began to preach and began to draw crowds in his own special way. He was kind of right out of the box. He was crazy. And there was this Gypsy Smith character that then ultimately shared the gospel with a man called Mordecai Ham. Mordecai Ham was really a little bit an unknown evangelist. He went round and he did revivals, you know. The revivals are meetings that God can sometimes be involved in. You know, it's just like, let's have a revival. Oh, we can't think of anything else to do. Let's do that. And you'd get a meeting and that. We'd call them evangelistic crusades, whatever. But revivals, I like the fact that they call it a revival. You might as well state what you're going to have. Or at least what you want. And so Mordecai Ham went out and he went into North Carolina, believe it or not. And he preached in a little church there, and it was so successful that the church closed down for a period of time after he left. It was a last-ditch effort. You know, they were just having a few people there, and Mordecai Ham preached, and no one noticed. A young man, skinny, tall young man, walk down that aisle and give his heart to Christ and walk out again. The church closed down. It was only a matter of 8 weeks it opened up again. That's good, eh? So they closed it down for 8 weeks. Why would you do that? But anyway, that's like, I don't know, what do you, anyway. And that skinny young man was still there. And he started to know the things of God and began to preach a little bit and began to open the Word of God. And he had a profound experience with God that he never told anybody about at all. It's only assumed that when he went up into the woods to a cabin and spent days up there that he had an encounter with God, because when he came back he was an entirely different young man. And William went out and preached the gospel, and we know him today as Billy Graham, and led millions of people to Christ because a man called Mordecai Ham got saved under a meeting with Gypsy Smith, who was in a meeting that everybody overlooked him because D.L. Moody and Ira Sankey spent some time with him and encouraged him in the Lord. And a fire happened, and a man got stirred up because a school teacher didn't think he'd done a great job in sharing the gospel. That's why I asked about souls this morning. Because to me, buildings are great. But this is going to fall down. It's not even been signed off yet, so it may fall down today. But only over the section here, so we should be pretty safe. And because God didn't come to build buildings. He came to build you. And he came to release himself in you. I need the worship team back up again, and I need you on fire.
Come on.
And we're just going to worship for a minute. Is that okay with you? Because there's some new creations going on in here, that the dust is being blown off, the covers are coming off. And my encouragement to you on this Sunday, where everybody else wants to worship carrots, is that if we're going to change a city like we think we like to, then we are going to have to get on fire ourselves. And I know it's the end of the year, and I know it's Christmas, and I know it's all of that, but you're going to have to stir yourself up in the Lord. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
And I'm preaching to the converted this morning. I'm preaching to me, because you can't point at someone and not have a few fingers pointing back at you. Remember that next time you're telling someone how to live, by the way. So would you worship with me this morning? If you want to, my suggestion is this, that you would make your seat, or you would make this altar a place of change and a place of encounter. Because I just sense the call of God as I've not felt it for a long time this morning, as I drove down Herbert Street. And I saw a lot of people going to a Christless eternity, and a lot of backslidden Christians skipping church to go and get a carrot. It's time. It's time to fill up the holes that the enemy has put in your cheese. It's time to forgive. It's time to let go. Because in the grand scheme of things, when we stand before Jesus, that offense will not be worth it. That pain will not be worth it. That thing that you carried about yourself will not be worth it. Only he will be worth it. Have eyes for him alone. How you guys doing? You all right up here? Come on. You sing it and I'll sing it as well. How about that? Whatever we're singing. I don't need words.